Good afternoon. The subcommittee will come to order. Welcome to the Ways and Means Trade Subcommittee. We're having a hearing today on how to stop the flow of synthetic opioids in the international mail system. In 2016, nearly 64,000 Americans died from drug overdoses, nearly doubled from 10 years ago. Of those deaths, approximately 66% involved opioids. In my home state of Washington, there has been a 134% increase in opioid-related cases between 2004 and 2016. That's an increase of 33%. To put this in stark and shocking terms, the increase in opioid-related deaths in Washington state exceeds the growth in the state's population. There's been a sharp rise in the number of deaths involving fentanyl, a cheap synthetic opioid that is up to 50 times stronger than heroin and up to 100 times stronger than morphine. The number of Americans who died from an overdose on synthetic opioid more than doubled from 2015 to 2016 because of fentanyl. And because fentanyl is so potent, it takes only a very small amount to cause severe or deadly reactions. Fentanyl enters the United States with alarming ease. It is frequently sold online, then shipped to the United States, typically from China, through express delivery carriers or through the international mail. Because it's shipped in such small quantities, it is very difficult to detect. For the last 15 years, Customs and Border Protection by law has required private carriers to transmit advanced electronic data on shipments entering the United States. The data typically includes the shipper and recipient name and address, as well as the package contents, all of which help CBP identify high-risk shipments. CBP has exercised its discretion not to impose this data requirement on the Postal Service because the Postal Service operates in a different environment than private carriers do. As a result, international mail shipments arrive in the United States with little information. This lack of data creates a significant vulnerability that can be easily exploited by drug traffickers. To the credit of CBP and the Postal Service, they've established a pilot program to test the effectiveness of acquiring advanced electronic data on a small subset of mail shipments. The pilot itself is an important step, and I commend the agencies for taking that step. But as the pilot has expanded, there are significant concerns about the quality of the data supplied by foreign postal operators and the ability of the Postal Service to physically retrieve the packages that CBP targets. I'm eager to hear from our witnesses today about what steps the agencies are taking to improve the pilot program and whether they believe it's been effective. I also look forward to hearing about the unique challenges surrounding the Postal Service's ability to collect and transmit advanced electronic data. And finally, I'd like to thank CBP and the Postal Service for working closely and cooperatively with our bipartisan committee staff to craft a legislative solution that would require the transmittal of advanced electronic data on all international mail shipments in a way that is effective and achievable, and ensures the agencies are held accountable to Congress. I'd also like to thank Representative Mike Bishop, who is leading the committee's effort on this important issue, together with Representative Vern Buchanan and Carlos Curbelo, as well as Representative French Hill for his work to improve the detection of fentanyl by the Postal Service, and Representative John Faso, who is here with us today to show his commitment to help solving this problem. The opioid crisis must be addressed from every angle, and that includes stopping synthetic opioids from entering our country. We must do more to protect our families and our communities from this deadly substance and requiring advanced electronic data on international mail shipments that would help us do that. Right now, I'll yield to Mr. Pascrell, the ranking member, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Riker, for holding the hearing today, and I want to thank Mr. Owen, Mr. Citron. Mr. Owen is the Executive Assistant Commissioner, correct me if I'm wrong, Office of Field Operations, U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Thank you for being here today. And Robert Citron, who's Vice President of Network Operations in the U.S. Postal Office. So you're at the heart of what we're talking about today. So thank you both. Every day in the United States, 115 Americans lose their lives to opiates. So we're trying to attack the problem from every direction possible. In 2016, my home state of New Jersey alone experienced 2,056 lives lost to this epidemic. The New Jersey Attorney General's office predicts that the number this year could surpass 3,000. One of the ways that synthetic opioids make their way into the United States is through the mail. Fentanyl, an illicit synthetic opioid that is extremely deadly, primarily comes from China. Fentanyl is frequently sold online, shipped to the United States in very small quantities, making it hard to detect. These sellers are incredibly easy to find online, and there's evidence of multiple fatalities in which the victim received fentanyl through the mail from China. Ports of entry are a critical juncture in the flow of synthetic opiates. Just across the river from my district in New York City, the Postal Service receives international mail at one of its 5 international service centers. The Postal Service receives an astronomical volume of mail, handling an estimated 275 million international packages in 1 year. Given this high volume of international shipments, more data is needed for international shipments to catch synthetic opioids at the ports of entry before they enter our country and devastate so many of our communities. To address the vulnerability, I was proud to sponsor the Synthetics Trafficking and Overdose Prevention, or the STOP Act, with my friend Congressman Pat Tiberi, and we miss him, Ranking Member Neal of the entire committee. This bill would require the Postal Service to transmit advanced electronic data to Customs and Border Patrol on international shipments into the United States. This information typically includes the name and the address of the shipper, the recipient, as well as the contents of the package. When CBP identifies shipments that may pose a risk, they can place a hold on the shipment, notify carriers that a package must be presented for examination. This data will help CBP identify and stop the shipments of synthetic opioids coming from China and other countries around the world. I understand that CBP and the U.S. Post Office have some concerns with the STOP Act as it currently stands, but I'm confident that we can work on a bipartisan basis to address these concerns, maintain a robust mechanism that ensures that the CBP and USPS are held accountable for collecting data on international shipments. The Postal Service and Customs have already put in place a pilot program that has made great progress in the transmission of this electronic data. The program began in 2014, I believe, at JFK International Service Center, New York, and the Postal Service was able to secure data from foreign posts on certain international packages. CBP then targeted a small amount of mail each day for the Postal Service to locate and provide to CBP for this inspection. I understand that in 2017, the CBP and Postal Service expanded the pilot program, entered bilateral agreements with several foreign posts, including China, which accounts for nearly 2/3 of international mail in the United States. In 2017, Customs and Border Patrol seized more than 1,100 pounds of fentanyl. This rate doubled over the year before. However, an Office of Inspector General report found in 2016 that under the pilot program, the Postal Service had only presented around 80% of the packages targeted by CBP for inspection, and the majority, more than 60%, of international packages received by the Postal Service had no advanced electronic data associated with them. Much of the data it did receive from foreign posts was low quality. We also know that private carriers like UPS and FedEx are already required to provide advanced electronic data, but have separate requirements and receive only around 1/4 the volume of packages as the U.S. Postal Service. It is my hope that with the continued progress of the pilot program and subsequently with the STOP Act passage, we can address the remaining vulnerabilities within the system itself. Again, I thank you both for being here today, and I turn it back to our chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pasquarello. Today we're joined by two witnesses. The first witness is Mr. Todd Owen, the Executive Assistant Commissioner for CBP's Office of Field Operations. Our second witness is Mr. Rob Cintron, Vice President of the Postal Service's Network Operations. Before recognizing our first witness, let me note that our time is limited, as almost always we say. So you should limit your testimony to 5 minutes, please, and members should keep their questioning to 5 minutes. Mr. Owen, your written statement will be made a part of this record, and you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Great, thank you. Chairman Reichert, Ranking Member Pasquarello, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear today to discuss the role of U.S. Customs and Border Protection in combating the flow of dangerous illicit drugs into the United States. As America's unified border security agency, CBP plays a critical role in our nation's efforts to keep dangerous drugs from entering our communities. CBP interdicts drugs and other dangerous items at our ports of entry, including multiple mail and express courier facilities, by leveraging advanced electronic data, automated targeting systems, and intelligence-driven strategies, and by using various types of detection technology as part of our multi-layered, risk-based approach to enhance the security of our borders. Since the STOP Act was first introduced, CBP, working collaboratively with the Postal Service and our law enforcement partners, has made strong progress in enhancing our enforcement capabilities and the effectiveness in the international mail and express courier environments, but more must be done. Recent bilateral agreements regarding advanced electronic data between the U.S. Postal Service and foreign postal operators have increased CBP's ability to target high-risk shipments. At the start of 2016, CBP was receiving advanced electronic data, or AED, on a limited basis from only 8 countries. Today, we are receiving advanced electronic data from 28 countries, accounting for over 40% of all international mail shipments with goods. CBP works internationally to increase the volume and the accuracy of the AED provided to the Postal Service. CBP has now initiated pilot programs at the top 5 international mail facilities in JFK, Los Angeles, Miami, Chicago, and San Francisco, which allow CBP officers to target high-risk shipments using AED. Through these pilots, CBP has enhanced our automated targeting capabilities and has been working with the Postal Service to develop protocols to ensure that every shipment selected for CBP by examination is in fact presented for inspection. Last summer, CBP and the Postal Service signed a memorandum of understanding aimed at increasing the level of advanced electronic data while aligning inspection processes. In the past year, CBP has increased our staffing at the 6 main international mail facilities by 20%, and all CBP narcotics detection canines assigned to the mail facilities, express courier operations, and international airports have now been trained to detect fentanyl, adding an important detection capability at our ports of entry. Once detected, these substances must be positively identified. In the past 18 months, CBP has deployed identification testing equipment so that officers can quickly determine what the unknown substances are. The average fentanyl seizure in the international mail environment is only 700 grams and arrives as an unknown powder. CBP officers must have the technology enabling them to quickly and safely identify these unknown substances. CBP has increased the availability of such testing equipment, and we are appreciative to Congress for the recently passed funding, which will allow us to add even additional testing equipment. In the mail and express courier environments, the fentanyl detected arrives primarily from China and is over 90% pure. CBP has deployed the necessary personal protective equipment to safely inspect and process these narcotics. We've also deployed naloxone or Narcan to our ports of entry, so if our officers or our canines are accidentally exposed to these deadly substances, we can quickly administer these treatments to save their lives. And lastly, substantive and timely information sharing is critical to targeting and interdicting shipments containing illicit drugs. CBP's National Targeting Center collaborates with critical partners on a daily basis, including HSI, the DEA, FBI, members of the intelligence community, and the Postal Inspection Service. These investigative relationships are critical to delivering consequences to those who try to smuggle narcotics across our border. In closing, we are seeing an increase in interdictions as a result of the efforts I have outlined. In 2015, CBP seized 50 pounds of fentanyl in the international mail and express courier environments. In 2016, that increased to 81 pounds of fentanyl, and in 2017, 335 pounds of fentanyl were seized again in the mail and express courier environments. Already this fiscal year, we have seized 211 pounds of fentanyl and expect to exceed our numbers by early this summer. So despite this success, much more must still be done. We must continue to increase the level and accuracy of the advanced electronic data provided. We must further refine our targeting capabilities. We must find a technological solution that can quickly examine parcels for the presence of contraband without having to open the package. And we must work with our law enforcement partners to identify and dismantle those criminal networks bringing these illicit narcotics into our communities and ensure criminal prosecutions. We must deliver consequences. Chairman Reichert, Ranking Member Pascrell, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Mr. Cintron, your written statement will be made part of the record, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Okay, good afternoon. Chairman Reichert, Ranking Member Pascrell, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you, Chairman Reichert, for calling this hearing. My name is Robert Cintron. I am the Vice President, Network Operations for the United States Postal Service. I oversee the Postal Service's national distribution network, including its operations at the International Service Centers, known as ISCs. I appreciate the opportunity to testify before this subcommittee on our efforts to combat opioids in the mail. This includes improvements in the collection and receipt of advanced electronic data, or AED. Together with our federal agency partners, we are committed to work with foreign postal operators to increase AED for packages coming into the United States in order to improve the targeting of illicit drugs and other contraband. We collect AED for more than 90% of outbound international mail. In the past 3 years, we have increased the receipt of AED on inbound shipments from virtually none to over 40% as of March 2018. A substantial portion of these originate in China. The amount of AED from China is expected to grow significantly by the end of this year. Since January 2017, the number of countries sending AED to the Postal Service has grown from 8 to 27 and includes China and other countries of interest. We have prioritized obtaining AED from the largest volume foreign postal operators, which collectively account for over 90% of all inbound volume. We now require AED on packages where rates are established under bilaterally negotiated agreements and currently have such agreements in place with postal operators in Australia, Canada, China, Hong Kong, and Korea. Moreover, 60 foreign posts have entered into voluntary data sharing agreements to facilitate the exchange of AED. In September 2017, the Postal Service, CBP, completed a Memorandum of Understanding to solidify our interagency partnership. Additionally, a program initiated at the New York ISC to use inbound AED to facilitate more advanced targeting by CBP has been expanded to all 5 ISCs across the country. Over the last year, the Postal Service has provided hundreds of thousands of records per day to CBP and expanded the number of countries and types of packages available for targeting. We have also implemented an automated process to identify targeted pieces requested by CBP. Additionally, we provided training to ISC employees to reinforce proper processes for handling and presenting mail in accordance with CBP requirements. To further improve the federal government's coordination of oversight over inbound international items, the Postal Service, CBP, and the FDA formed an interagency work group. The group is working on efforts to build capacity to exchange AED, develop detection technology, continue information sharing, provide technical assistance for legislation, and improve physical and IT infrastructure. We also continue to work in close collaboration with our law enforcement branch, the Inspection Service, which has seen significant improvements in its ability to seize opioids. From fiscal year 2016 through fiscal year 2017, the Inspection Service achieved a 375% increase in international parcel seizures and an 880% increase in domestic parcel seizures related to opioids. The Postal Service agrees with the goal of the STOP Act to increase AED. However, unlike private companies, the Postal Service must accept and deliver mail from nearly every country in the world. As we do not control the induction of foreign mail destined for the United States, we cannot control the collection of AED abroad. As detailed in my written testimony, we have worked with DHS, CBP, the FDA, and State Department to provide technical assistance for proposed legislation that recognizes the practical realities and sets achievable targets. Additionally, our recommendations align with the administration's opioid initiative. In conclusion, we share the concerns about illegal drugs and contraband entering the country through the mail and commercial carriers. The Postal Service is committed to taking all practicable measures to ensure our nation's mail security and provide the best, most efficient service possible. Thank you for this opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you both for your testimony. I'll start out with the questioning. It seems to me that in the national conversation about opioids, there's not enough emphasis placed upon the dangers that synthetic opioids pose to first responders, law enforcement officials, postal workers, and I think that, Mr. Owen, you mentioned your canine units who may come into direct contact with these substances in the normal course of their duties. Has the rise in shipments of synthetic opioids posed a greater risk to CBP officers and Postal Service workers? And what measures are your agencies taking to protect the workforce? And would having advanced electronic data on international mail shipments improve your ability to protect your employees?
Well, sir, speaking on behalf of U.S. Customs and Border Protection, yes, the risk of accidental exposure has always been there, whether it's fentanyl, which has much more deadly consequences now, or throughout our history we dealt with narcotics interdiction. With the increase in the fentanyl and the other synthetic opioids, we've now have deployed naloxone, or commonly known as Narcan, throughout our ports of entry, so it is readily available for all of our officers, as well as for members of the traveling public should they be coming in through an airport or a seaport and have an incident with the narcotics. So we have deployed that. We have special equipment at our mail facilities, our express courier facilities, to allow us to safely inspect the packages. So I think as an agency, we've put a lot of emphasis on personal protective equipment, safe protocols to handle the fentanyl.
Yeah, as it relates to postal employees, over 600,000 employees in the organization. So as it relates to keeping them safe, we do suspicious package training. So our focus really is not just on fentanyl, but any suspicious package that they could come in contact with. That would be at any one of our processing facilities, the ISCs, delivery units. And we've got specific protocols for how they would handle those suspicious packages. As it relates very specifically at the ISCs, we have handling procedures. Again, the pilot program has got some very specific ways for us to isolate through automation that volume and keep so we can isolate and then present to CBP upon request. We do a lot of standard work instruction. We do a lot of visual aids that are utilized by the employees, so it's very visible in terms of what suspicious package and the protocols are. The last thing that we do, we have deployed Narcan to the inspection service, and in the next several months, we will be deploying that to the largest postal facilities and largest post offices around the country, and that'll be happening in the next few months.
Okay, and the last part of that question had to do with electronic data, having more access to that, having accurate data. I'm sure you get some intel on some packages coming through and you're able to act proactively. So how would advanced electronic data help keep the employees and your canine unit safer?
Yes, absolutely. When you look at the volume that we're receiving today, every day 1.7 million parcels come into the country through the mail and through the express courier facilities, 1.7 million a day. When I last testified before Congress on this subject in January, it was at 1.4 million. So in the course of 3.5 months, we've increased by roughly 35% in the overall volume. The manual inspection of volumes like that are not efficient and not effective. We need advanced electronic information so we can use our targeting system to identify those shipments that pose a greater risk and then initiate the proper inspection protocols, whether it's to safely isolate that package and open it in these specialized boxes that we have with special ventilation systems and things of that nature. So without advanced electronic data, we will simply not be effective in identifying the high-risk shipments when we're dealing with such growing volumes through e-commerce.
So the quality of your data would increase if you had some of the technology that you just mentioned. The Senate Subcommittee on Homeland Security, as you know, did a study, and the subcommittee found that the quality of the advanced electronic data from the Postal Service receives from foreign postal operators is very low. The report found that at times basic information like the sender name and addresses were not provided, or the data was a long line of illogical letters and characters. Can either of you speak to the quality of the data that
when we started the pilot with China Post, the quality of the data in some circumstances was not what we had expected it to be. It was not very effective for targeting, but now that we have been at this for about 18 months, we have seen the quality improve as well as the timeliness of the data improve. So as with any process, as it matures, we're getting stronger. The data quality is getting better. It's presented more timely to CBP. We're able to effectively target the shipment before it arrives, place it on hold, giving the Postal Service the opportunity to stop it and present it to us for inspection. So the process is improving.
Mr. Cintron?
Yeah, I think the quality, I look at it from two perspectives. One of them is around being able to get the data. So one thing that we do every day, we're monitoring every day that the data that we expect to get, we're actually receiving. Work very closely with the foreign postal operators on that exchange. The second piece is we use our internal advanced analytics group at Postal Service has been taking the data sets, and we've been looking at, there are certain fields that we expect, A, are they getting filled out? So are the fields actually populated? That's number one. Two, where we're starting to spend some time on is the quality of what's in the field itself. And I think collaboratively, that's the kind of stuff that we can do across the agencies to really improve. Last part I might add on that is that we use this AED not only from the pilots at the ISC itself, but we have expanded this to downflow facilities away from the ISC. So using that electronic information, if we capture a piece downstream, we're able to actually capture it and present it back to CBP. And in the summer of this year, we'll also have the ability to capture that at a delivery unit. So if for some reason it gets further downstream, we'll have that ability very soon to be able to capture it and then bring it back to CBP.
I appreciate your answers and some of the specifics there. I would ask that maybe you could supply some additional specifics in a written answer to this question as far as specific steps that your agencies are taking to ensure that you are receiving good and actionable data from foreign postal operators. So if you could provide that in writing. Now I'll recognize Mr. Pascrell for his question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, thank you, Todd and Robert, for being here with us today. You're invaluable, your testimony. The focus on efforts to improve the detection of synthetic opioids in our international mail system and prevent them from entering the United States. It's a big task. We understand that. And my first question goes right to the country that accounts for a very high percentage of all packages entering the United States. And China is the primary source of fentanyl to our folks. Okay? So this is a question for both of you. What is the status of efforts on coordinating our efforts with China, number one, and what stands in the way of that, B? And the second question is, how close are we to collecting advanced electronic data on all shipments from China? All shipments. Those are two questions. Who wants to go first?
Yeah, I think in terms of our ability to collect the advanced electronic data from China, we get a substantial amount of it today. One stream of product that comes in out of China is what we consider this untracked volume. There's a lot of effort underway right now to get AED on that. The first step to it is getting barcode information on those packages, and we're seeing significant amounts of that today. The focus for us is by the time we hit December of this year, we will have a significant portion of the mail from China that will have advanced electronic data. We're projecting that the overall number for the organization is going to bring the United States up to about 70% total of AED collected, and a big portion of this will come from that one large effort. Not to mention
And how is it shipped? Is it by cover? Is it actually right out in the open? The majority of the material that's shipped into this country that winds up in American homes, how is it shipped?
The parcels themselves, or how is the fentanyl
the parcel
smuggled in?
itself.
Generally, just the package. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's generally packages that are coming in, right? So cargo planes are bringing, product in from China into the ports here in the U.S.
Well, how are they marked?
They're enclosed in sacks, right? So the way that these come in, we have large sacks of mail that contain a significant number of pieces in them. The way that we leverage the AED data, we're actually scanning that sack, right? And in that sack, there's information nested of what's sitting in that sack that detects or tells us that there's a piece in there that, potentially we're looking for, and we extract that sack out of the mail itself or out of the flow of the mail, and then we extract the pieces. But these are, again, several hundred pieces nested inside of a sack.
Drugs from all countries come into the United States of America. Most of the drugs that come into this country, prescription drugs, are legal, and they're marked such. Is that correct? Or am I incorrect?
Most of the prescription drugs coming in from overseas, need to be cautious as to what you're purchasing from overseas suppliers.
Yeah, so we have to have enough resources and manpower to go through this mail and be able to take out what is being shipped into this country to go on the streets, basically, most of it.
No, sir, the volumes are just too overwhelming. In the case of fentanyl, again, the average seizure is 700 grams. It's just a small baggie that you could hide inside a book, inside anything at all. It's very, very difficult. We'll send those packages through X-ray systems to try to identify the anomalies. We have the canines that run them.
So your point, Tom, is that basically this is hidden. Most of it that comes into this country that's illicit is hidden.
Inside some other commodities, yes, sir.
So how do you find it if it's hidden?
Again, it's very difficult. The X-ray systems, the canines, the intuition of the officers. But really, it comes again back to the advanced electronic data, knowing the parties that are sending it, the parties that are receiving it, different rule sets that we have in our targeting will help us to go through those mass quantities of mail to say this is a shipment that poses a greater likelihood of being problematic, and it's something that we need to pull aside and look. The manual process of dumping all of these huge sacks onto conveyor belts, pushing them through X-rays, and perhaps having the canines run them, opening what you can, the volumes are just too overwhelming to be effective.
Mr. Rice.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here to testify today. Mr. Owen, you mentioned that we are up to 20 countries that are providing advanced electronic data.
Yes, sir, 28.
28. What is advanced electronic data? What is that?
Advanced electronic data is a data set, if you will, of certain data elements that the foreign post will capture, will transmit to the U.S. Postal Service, who will then forward it to us.
So in other words, they're looking for suspicious characters that are mailing packages.
The individuals who are sending it, receiving it, the descriptions, the weights, the quantities.
So there's some kind of a database of that we're sharing back and forth.
Well, that advanced information is run through our law enforcement, our trade databases to identify those shipments that are outside of what is normal. Of course, the targeting efforts are focused on previous violators, things of concern that we won't get into here, but it's a very rich targeting environment in the mail, and we're pretty good at picking out shipments that are problematic.
And you're saying there's so many parcels, and it's so small and it's so easy to hide that really, it's almost an instrument. I mean, you could add as many people as you wanted to and as many x-ray machines as you wanted to, and it's still going to come through. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that's why we need the advanced electronic data to be very effective, because opening 1.7 million packages a day is just not possible. So we need to identify that smaller subset that is a higher risk, because the targeting systems have said, for whatever reason, this one needs to be pulled aside. That is the only way we can be effective in this space.
All right. So we're hearing that 90% of the fentanyl's coming from China. Is that correct? Isn't that what you said?
The fentanyl that's coming from China is 90% pure.
Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me. And do you know what percentage of the fentanyl that's killing people in the United States is coming from China? Do we know that?
I do not know that.
Okay. So is fentanyl the only drug that's being coming in through the mail, the only opioid?
No, there's various analogs, different types of synthetic opioids that are coming through the mail: cocaine, heroin, meth, all the traditional narcotics.
Is most of it coming from China, or we know that?
Most of the fentanyl?
Most of the opioids coming through the mail.
A good deal coming through, the opioids coming through, I believe, are coming from China, yes.
What about Mexico and the South
Mexico,
America?
you're primarily seeing your meth and your cocaine primarily.
Okay, and do we have the same level of scrutiny of packages coming in from Mexico and Central America, South America?
The narcotics that are coming in from the Mexican border are primarily coming across the land border in passenger vehicles through our ports of entry.
Okay, not necessarily through the Postal Service.
Not necessarily from mail, yes.
Gotcha. You know, looking at the, when you consider diseases and maladies of humans, and you look at the graphs of how they affect people in our life expectancy, most every malady that we incur, they are either starting to trend level or down. I mean, we're getting a handle on a lot of these things, and certainly we got a long way to go with a lot of things, but we're getting better. But with opioids, the trend is startling. I mean, it's not that it's getting better; it's actually getting much, much worse. I mean, it's past traffic deaths in South Carolina. Over 100 people in my home county, Horry County, were killed last year, and we've got to do a much better job of dealing with that. Do you have any idea about what percentages come through the Postal Service versus other methods, you know, across our southern border?
Speaking for the fentanyl, that we actually have more seizures in mail, but smaller quantities than what we have in the express courier environment. So in the express courier environments, fewer seizures, but more quantity, so larger shipments. You compare that to what's coming across the Mexican border, much larger quantities of fentanyl, but it's mixed in with other hard narcotics, and the fentanyl coming in through Mexico, because it is mixed with other things, is less than 10% pure. So really the greater concern is that small packet coming directly from China that's 90% pure.
Okay, do you think that we would make a bigger dent by focusing more on the small packages coming through the post office, or for the large couriers coming across the southern border?
I think we need to focus both on the Postal Service and the express courier companies that are bringing through their hubs in the U.S. too. I think if we focus too much resources on one, the drug traffickers will just shift into that other avenue into the country. So I think our strategy has to focus on the international mail. It also has to continue to focus on the express courier environments, as well as interdiction along the southwest border for the hard narcotics that are coming through the ports of entry.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Levin.
Hello.
Good afternoon.
Thank you so much for coming and for holding this hearing. It's hard to know, but just based on what you find, do you have any estimate as to how much fentanyl is being sent into this country through the Postal Service? Do you have any guess?
No, sir.
What percentage, this was asked more or less, is most of it coming from China?
In terms of the purity and the most dangerous fentanyl is coming directly from China. And the fentanyl coming in from Mexico is much less pure, mixed in with other hard narcotics.
And do you know from where in China it's coming?
It is coming from throughout the country. Yes.
You can't tell anything about where it's produced?
Well, with the electronic information, we're able to identify who the shippers were of those seizures, working customs to customs between U.S. Customs and Border Protection and the General Administration of China Customs. We're able to exchange information as to those types of seizures. And then the bigger investigations, the State Department and DEA are involved with those types of things.
And so you know the shippers, and at least in some cases. And then what kind of communication or action comes from the U.S. as to those shippers? Do you know?
That is what filters into our automated targeting systems. So when we have a seizure and we identify the parties that were involved with those seizures, we will set up the rules to target additional shipments that may be going between those parties to those addresses, all of those types of selector information.
And is any action attempted with the Chinese against the sources of the fentanyl?
And that would be a question that we'd have to speak with the State Department about. That is not something that CBP is engaged with. We are, again, engaged that customs to customs relationship, but not as to the bigger getting to the supply, the source of the fentanyl.
Do you know, sir?
I would not know.
And do the shipments go, they're small amounts, to individuals, do you think? Or
Yes, they're definitely going to individuals. Individuals will go on the dark web or even on the regular web and will purchase the fentanyl. The fentanyl will be shipped. It'll be either misdescribed as some other, and another type of medicine, or it will, again, be smuggled in everything you could think of, inside books, inside pens, inside figurines, whatever the case may be. And again, that average size seizure we're seeing is 700 grams. It's very easy to hide 700 grams in anything. So when we do identify a shipment and identify it as fentanyl, we will work with our criminal investigators, with Homeland Security investigation, as well as the state and local task forces to do what we call as a controlled delivery, to allow the merchandise to move to the recipient so that additional arrests can be made.
And so you think in many cases action is taken against the recipients?
I think there needs to be consequences against the recipient. I think part of the challenge that we've had is to be able to timely identify what those white unknown powders are. The equipment that we have purchased with the assistance of Congress in the last 2 years allows us to quickly identify what that merchandise is, what that commodity is. If you have ordered your illegal narcotics and you're waiting and it's now been several months, it hasn't shown up, and then it shows up, you're not going to take receipt of those goods. So the investigative component needs to occur timely after an interdiction. That's where the testing equipment allows us to get that presumptive determination as to what that unknown substance is, so that the criminal investigators can then move forward and try to initiate arrests on that commodity.
So we are now taking actions to try to determine the source.
Yes.
And to try to determine the amount, and to be able to take action against the people who ordered.
Yes, working again with the investigative partners, the various task forces that have been set up all across the country. When we will interdict at the mail facility, it is our goal to work with them to conduct, again, a delivery and make an arrest on the individuals that have ordered those products. There must be consequences behind bringing this in, because if we just interdict it today, they can go back online tomorrow and try again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marchant.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for being here today, Mr. Owen. Are you familiar with the Senate Subcommittee Investigations Report on Drug Trafficking that was released in January?
Not sure which one that was, sir.
It came out January this year.
The Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations? The one
Senate Subcommittee of Investigations.
Yes, the one that talked about a lot of the online purchases and things. Yes,
that's
sir.
the
Yes,
one
sir.
that we've been studying. Their study found that 318 million packages, international packages, and most of them from China, entered the United States with no advanced data on the shipper recipient or the contents of the package, which were used by your agency to target packages that contain fentanyl. Mr. Clinton, Mr. Cintron, the Postal Regulatory Commission's annual compliance determination report disclosed that of those 318 million packages, there was basically a $170 million loss by the post office last year alone. We've written a letter to Mr. Mnuchin asking him to look into this matter and to ask him why we continue to cooperate with the postal agreement that basically binds us to these lower cost packages. So the way we begin to look at it is if many of these packages contain illicit drugs, if most of these packages contain something we really don't want shipped into the United States, why in the world are the United States citizens, people that buy stamps, people that use postal, why in the world would we be subsidizing the very sending of those packages to the United States?
Yeah, I'll try and answer that. Not the subject matter expert on all of the rates as how they apply. Familiar with the report would say that it identifies one stream of mail coming into the country. We would be looking at international with all of the pieces that are involved with it. There have been changes that I'm aware of that change some of that cost coverage for the pieces coming in that mail stream going forward. I can tell you that getting back to the AED, why it's so important, as you mentioned, some of this without the AED. I will say that China, we've seen a substantial amount of additional AED coming in, and that's really been our focus. As we said, we've been focused on top countries, get the AED from them. We've signed 5 bilateral agreements. One of those is with China. Express mail, as an example, is mandatory for them to have AED, and these bilaterals mandate that as well.
Yeah, and all of that is really good work. But at the base of all this is almost a competitive advantage given to China, almost an inducement for them to ship these by a smaller package, a package that is very specifically subsidized through this international agreement that we're really not even a party to anymore. We observe it and we respect the rates, but in many cases it's more expensive to send something inside the United States to Dallas than it is to send it from China to Dallas. And I just have to say that I think that, first of all, the Postal Service, the Postal Inspection Service could use the extra revenue generated just to screen these packages. And it would certainly reduce the number of packages if they were paying a significantly higher price to ship them in here. It just didn't. So I've introduced H.R. 5524 that basically is called the Post Act. It basically terminates this subsidy. I believe that if the Postal Service wanted to use that extra money to bring about the services, employ the people to interdict this stuff, that'd be a decision of Congress, but it would certainly be something that the United States citizens would feel a whole lot better about than if they knew that these millions of packages were coming in from China, and I would say a great deal of them have these drugs in them, and they are contributing to the opioid problem, not trying to solve it. Thank you very much.
Mr. Kind.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this very important meeting. I want to thank the witnesses for your testimony here today. I represent a very large rural western Wisconsin district, and the opioid epidemic is sweeping through my district, as it is my state, and most parts of the country right now. And most of us truly believe it's an all-hands-on-deck moment. Now more than ever, we're going to need incredibly strong partnerships at the federal, state, local level to try to get out ahead of that. I've been holding a lot of opioid meetings and forums in my district, too, getting feedback with people on the ground, from law enforcement to healthcare providers to addiction clinics, and they all conclude that unless we address the demand aspect, the addictive qualities, and try to get out ahead of that, there's not enough we can do as far as the enforcement or the interdiction part. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't try. As a former prosecutor, I had to live in this drug world for a while, and I know how nefarious it can be. But the challenge at the borders is certainly gigantic. And if we can help you with more tools and how to better intercept and how to identify, you need to let us know. AED, something that we required back in '02 with the private carriers, went into effect, but Mr. Cintron, at that time, USPS was exempted. And I think one of the reasons was some of the international obligations that existed. Any of those still exist today that might make universal AID difficult to achieve or might get us into trouble with some other countries?
Yeah, I think that's probably the big difference, right? Through the UPU, right, we're for the United States, we're the postal designated provider, you know, to deliver mail for over 192 countries. So that we don't get to choose, unlike the private industry where private carriers could choose where they're going to do business. We're pretty much under the treaty obligations required to deliver for the 192 countries. So,
and it has to be uniform with all of them? Is that the problem?
I'm sorry?
The requirements, the standards have to be uniform for all 191?
Yeah, I think, and look, our focus has really been, as I said earlier, we're trying to focus on the top 20 countries that represent 90% of the volume. So there's different capacity levels for each one of these countries. So while it's a deterrent and you can't keep them all the same, there's a lot of work with every one of these countries to try to figure out how to get the AED. But the focus primarily, again, let's focus on where we have the big pile of the volume. Like I said, 20 countries represent 90% of that volume today.
So is it an issue of capacity building with some of these other nations?
Yeah, I mean, if you read some of the reports, look, in some cases we've got countries and places inside countries that either don't have power, don't have internet, don't have technical capability. There's privacy issues that, you know, could be an issue in some countries. So it is a big issue all the way around of capacity.
Let me ask you both. GAO went in and did a 2017 assessment as far as the pilot AED program and how it's going, and they came forward with some recommendations. One is some measurable performance standards in that. Where are we in all of that?
And we concurred with all of those. I mean, we clearly agree that we should measure the effectiveness of AED, but the manual way to screen the mail is just not going to be effective. So far at JFK Airport this year, we've made 189 fentanyl seizures. 125 of those have been based on targeting through the AED. So while we're working on those performance measures, we're seeing the effects, the positive results every single day of why we need that advanced electronic data.
Okay. Yeah, Mr. Cintron, anything to add as far as GAO recommendations?
Yeah, I would just say, look, we've been working very closely together between both agencies. The focus for us, twofold: get AED, work with the foreign post to get the data. The second real big piece is for us to present to CBP everything they're asking for. So well over 80% today on the presentation. We've seen some pretty large numbers since we've started this project. All 5 ISCs are up. As I mentioned earlier, one of the key focuses for us is to make sure that nothing gets beyond the ISCs. So as you've mentioned, a lot of volume comes in. Very small percentage could leave the ISC, which is why we've expanded our capabilities through automation to be able to capture a piece downstream. And as I mentioned, in the summer of this year, we will also be able to now capture it at a delivery unit. So before it even gets to the street, we'll have that capability.
Mr. Owen, with what little time I have remaining, obviously there was a lot of delegations, a lot of trade missions, a lot of trade discussions going on between the U.S. and China right now. Do you feel as if this issue in particular is being elevated high enough in those discussions with Chinese officials that they need to be doing more to crack down?
I believe so, but I'm not the expert on those negotiations. I know from the customs to customs relationship, we've had these discussions, those higher level treaty discussions, so I can't speak to that.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you both for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you both for being here. Some of the information we had beforehand, I was looking at, and I think that there was an article in the Wall Street Journal, and just you being here really helps us, because I don't think a lot of people understand just how difficult it is to do what we're asking you to do, especially with the manpower you have and the volume and the capacity that you're trying to handle. But my question comes back, and I think Mr. Kine was talking about it, but so the UPU, the Universal Postal Union, now I'm reading this from this article, was founded in 1874, and it's now a United Nations agency. It sets inter-country rates for mail delivery. It would just seem to me that something that was founded in 1874, if we're still working under the parameters of that, there's probably some other considerations we should be looking at. Now, there's not one person sitting up here, either at this panel or out in the room, that doesn't have a great concern with this opioid crisis and fentanyl, and we're saying, well, we know where it comes from. Listen, the Chinese use our mail system because it's a cheap way to deliver. And they also get a big break on that because of the UPU. That's my understanding. So you being on the front line and you being the ones that are the people we go to and say, so what would you do different? So we know what the problem is. We know why we have a problem. Then the question is, so how do we fix it? And I'm amazed that we have an agreement for, in 1874, and we're still running with that as the parameters of the way we should run the whole outline. I think Mr. Pascrell hit on this too. What can we do to help you help us? This is kind of a Jerry Maguire moment. Help me to help you. So what would we do? From a congressional standpoint, what would we do? And people keep talking about, look, we got this fentanyl problem, we got this drug problem, we got this overdose problem. I hear all that. But then we're talking about, we know where the source of it comes. And I get the idea with the AED, but it's kind of an honor roll. It's kind of an honor system. We're kind of believing what we see on the label, and then for some reason, other ways of shipping don't have to follow the same regulations. They go from original entry to destination, so they have more control of it. What would you suggest to us today, or what could you put, you can't do it right now, put it in writing. What could we do from a congressional standpoint to help you?
Well, I will thank you for the funding that we received in the FY18 budget. The money that was allocated to CBP to enhance our technology capabilities at our ports of entry, including the mail facilities, was definitely a positive. The additional 328 officers that was accounted for in the budget will definitely help staff up at some of the mail facilities, at the express courier facilities, as well as our seaports and some of our airports as well. So the funding that Congress has provided has been very appreciated. So thank you.
Okay, what else can we do though? Because I heard it was, so we can use different methods of technology. We have dogs that can smell this stuff out, but apparently just the volume alone creates a situation where we can't look at enough of these packages. But if we know where it's coming from and we know who the biggest user of this postal system is, my question is, there's an old saying, it's like you shoot yourself in the foot and then wonder why you're limping. If we know this, why do we keep following the same path and say, you know what, we know they're doing it, but we just don't know how to handle it? I'm trying to understand. Yeah. You're their front line. And I understand about the money. I get the thing about the money, because we throw money at every problem we can, and if we don't get the right result, then we just throw more money at it. What are we not doing with the money that we're already allocating, or how can we get better use out of what the taxpayers put into this?
The growth of e-commerce has just been overwhelming. When you look at what's coming out of China, the volumes are significant. We've been working with the technology folks within the Department of Homeland Security. When we can get to a piece of equipment that can tell us what's inside that package without us having to open the package, that really is a game changer for us. So the technology folks that are working towards this, I think, are close to having a solution with the different types of algorithms and the way the different systems can work, because that can really be a game changer in this space.
Okay, well, one of the things I was reading is one example. One Pennsylvania address was used to send more than 120 packages tied to payment to an online seller during a 2-month period in early 2017 alone. So when you're looking at these numbers and you're doing the analytics on them, there's got to be something that red flags or pops that up to say, wait, there's something that just doesn't make sense here.
Right. With the post-seizure analysis that we do, and with the information that is provided back to us from the local law enforcement, the task forces that we sit on, we take that information and we put it into our targeting system. So shipments that are destined for those areas of interest will be flagged and inspected, the next time they come in.
Okay, so through innovation and technology, we're going to be able to have a better feel for this. But I do say, if we already know who the bigger users of this way of getting cheap mail delivery to us, I mean, that should send out a real warning signal. But I appreciate what you're doing. But just let us know. And if there's something that you're seeing that we're not seeing, let us know how it is we can help you, because this affects every single American at every single level. So thanks so much for what you do. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I certainly agree that every single American and every type community or neighborhood is affected. I happen to represent a large, low-income population group in a big urban area, and of course, we're simply frightened to death. I'm wondering, since we know that China, whether intentionally, unintentionally, or however it happens, is a major concern in terms of the quantity that comes in, how cooperative would we say that China has been relative to trying to not only get a better handle on the situation, but also to reduce and stop the transmission?
I'll try to answer from the perspective of AED, right? So, for us, as we've been talking about today, the importance of the AED is for us to be able to do the type of analysis to really be able to identify particular addresses or places where we know we may have an issue. I would say as it relates to AED, because I can speak to that part, they have been very, very cooperative. As I said, one of the key structures we're going after right now is that untracked volume of mail that's coming through the country that has no tracking at all. We are very, very much along the way with them of getting the initial steps of getting it barcoded, and we expect by the end of the year a substantial amount of their mail, that untracked volume, will absolutely have AED, and then that'll help us with the analysis that we're doing.
Mr. Owen, you just mentioned or talked about the technology, and we know that technological advances are occurring significantly in our country. I was thinking that I just opened at the University of Illinois about 3 weeks ago their robotics competition, where hundreds of high school kids were coming in to practice. Are we hearing anything from our technical people relative to needs they may have that may not be being met sufficiently to do the kind of work and the experimentation that they are doing and attempting to do?
Well, I know the Science and Technology Directorate within DHS are looking at this challenge that we have and how we can design technology that can help us to see what's inside the containers, or what's inside the parcels. We're also working with TSA on some of the equipment that they currently have that helps to identify explosives within suitcases and things, and how can that be further developed to look for the synthetic substances and such that are inside of parcels. So there is a great deal of work that's being done in this area between Science and Technology Directorate and with some of the existing technology that's geared towards explosives that could be modified to focus on the opioids.
And finally, would I ask Mr. Sint, would you think that some of the other countries, even though we're not getting as much action from them, that they may be doing a better job than the areas where we're getting the most, than China and the other 2 or 3 countries?
Yeah, well, like I said, there's our focus has been on the top 20, not that we don't focus on the rest, but the top 20 generate 90% of the volume coming into the country. So a lot of work's being done with that group. As I said, 5 bilaterals that were just signed, over the past year that mandate AED. And that group represents close to 80% of the volume. So there's a lot of work. It's based really on capacity of the country in terms of our ability to get it, but there's cooperation with many different countries. So I think it varies from country to country in their abilities.
Thank you both, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Mr. Reed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our panelists today for the work you're doing and coming and having a conversation with us and how maybe we can assist you to address this critical issue that's impacting so many lives across the country, and in particular in Western New York and my district, our district of the 23rd. One of the things I'm a big advocate for is making sure as we deal with data, as we get into the data question, is that one of the things I learned when I first got here in 2010 is often the bureaucracies of Washington, D.C. Has an inability to make sure all the data is standardized so that there's seamless transition between the different agencies, be it the IRS into other agencies, et cetera. So the premise of my question is, how are you getting the data And is the data that you're receiving standardized across your organization so that there's no loss of information from that data exchange that's occurring either between your two organizations or, I would assume, in your efforts in coordination with law enforcement such as the FBI and other resources that are out there?
I'll start and I'll turn it over to Todd. Yeah, I mean, it is standardized in terms of how the electronic data comes into the country. So we do have standard formats. We do, when we onboard anyone, you heard us talk about these 60 data sharing agreements that we've had. That's kind of like the starting pieces of getting people to start exchanging the data. We then get into testing where they're actually
Okay, so Ms. Citron, when you get that data, when you enter that data, is that data accessible by the FBI? Is that data accessible by Customs? Do they have the capability in their departments to read your data, pick up your data, and coordinate with you on coordinated efforts to address this issue?
So 96 times a day, I pass the data on to Customs Border Protection.
And there's no technical barriers to you receiving that data and interpreting that data. Okay, that's good to hear. Now, going outside the government and our interactions with the express carriers, and this may have been uncovered, so bear with me, but when you're interacting with carriers like FedEx, UPS, DHL, those carriers, is there a data problem between your organizations and their organizations as to making sure that information is
They
shared?
provide the data directly to U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and there's no issues.
So you can read their data and they can read your data?
Yes, they've been, since the Trade Act of 2002, they've been providing the data to us. In the beginning, there was issues similar to what we're seeing now with the Postal Service in terms of being able to have all the data that we were looking for, the timely submission of the data, the accuracy of the data, the completeness. That has improved, and now the express couriers really are the model of where we need to go with the Postal Service. So I think with time, as this process matures, I think with the right focus, the right level of attention, the right funding stream, that this can be a model much like the express couriers are.
Excellent. And so what's the difference between the express carriers data and your data, or the postal carrier data, if there's a difference that we're trying to aspire to what the express carriers are doing?
The data elements are the same. It's just
what are they doing that you're not doing?
They control their supply chain from start to finish. So as they receive the goods at the source of origin, they immediately bring that data in through their process, transmit it to us. On the postal side, the foreign postal carrier collects that data and then transmits it to the U.S. Postal Service, who transmits it to us.
Okay, so that's what we have to try to streamline and improve upon, is what you're indicating. Okay. What do you do with the data when you get it? Are you deploying analytics? Are you deploying data mining on it?
Yes,
and
all of that.
do you have cutting-edge technology in order to?
Yes, we have our advanced targeting system. We have our National Targeting Center out in Northern Virginia. We've got everything you talked about down to a counter-network division that will identify the networks that are behind different shipments and things of that nature. So we have a very robust targeting system that will use not only our past enforcement results, but inputs from the intelligence community, all sorts of different intelligence items, and further streamline those targeting capabilities so that when we have those 1.7 million parcels coming in a day, we can identify those that need to be held, inspected, because they've got a higher risk for whatever trigger our targeting system said there's a concern here.
Well, that's good to hear. And is the analytics and technology the private sector is using in FedEx, UPS, the express carriers, is that at the similar capability, or is that better or worse?
Well, they collect the data and transmit it to us, and we run the targeting.
Oh, they're not running analytics?
No, not in terms of border security and our enforcement mission. That's all done by CBP. So it's their data that they transmit to us. We run it through the same system as the data that the Postal Service is providing to us.
That's interesting. So are the express carriers running any analytical triggers that they're sharing with you up front, or they're just giving you the data and relying on you to run the analytics?
We have very strong working relationships with the express carriers, and I think I'd just leave it at that.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate it. We don't want to let the bad guys know what we're up to. Well, keep up the good work, and anything you need from us, that we want to be of assistance. So with that, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Higgins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, fentanyl is 50 times more potent than heroin, and it's often used to enhance the potency of heroin. According to the Centers for Disease Control, 116 people a day die from opioids. This is obviously a national epidemic. And what you're saying is huge volumes of fentanyl is moved into the United States and Canada in the aggregate, yet that volume defies detection as it is moved in very small increments because of its potency?
overall volume of trade coming in from China is overwhelming. Hidden within that overall volume are small shipments of fentanyl.
And that's what defies detection.
It's very difficult.
Okay. And what are your tools of detection now, let's say at the airport? You had made reference to it in previous discussions, but I'm just curious what you have now and what is being developed to enhance those efforts.
The targeting, of course, begins with the advanced electronic data. So having that data as to who's shipping it to whom, other data elements that helps our targeting system to identify those shipments that are of concern. We also have the standard X-ray systems that have a role in this. We're looking to advance the technology. As we've talked about, all of our narcotics detection canines at the mail facilities, the express facilities at the airports have now been trained to detect fentanyl. So that is an addition. We've also increased our officers at the mail facilities by 20%. So combined, where I think we're having a much greater impact on the seizure rates, but again, the volume is very significant that's coming in.
So you're confident that that technology is evolving, the detection technology, to the point where even the smallest trace of fentanyl in a suitcase, which is further disguised in a book or something, will be detectable within?
That is where we hope the technology manufacturers can get us to, yes.
Where are those manufacturers, when do those manufacturers estimate that that technology will be available?
That I don't have.
They don't. Interesting. Let me ask you this. I represent Buffalo. The Peace Bridge connects Buffalo to Southern Ontario. Southern Ontario is a third of the entire population of Canada. Would we have a situation whereby, would it be easier for China to mail order fentanyl into Canada and then have it driven into the United States through places like Buffalo?
I don't think it would be easier. I know that Canada Border Services Agency, CBSA, also has the same challenges in their mail facilities. They're also seizing fentanyl directly from China. So it's going directly into Canada. It's going directly into the United States. I don't think there's a reason it would have to go into Canada to be moved across.
Customs and Border Protection coordinates well with their Canadian counterparts.
Yeah, we have an excellent relationship with CBSA. We have their targeters with us in Northern Virginia, and we with them up in Toronto.
Got it. So, you know, the President has indicated a strong commitment to help fund, I think, on the demand side, this national crisis, and he's also indicated that in discussions with China, greater efforts will be made to get the Chinese government to crack down on these efforts of some 100,000 pharmaceutical companies in China. Do you hold a lot of confidence that we'll be able to make progress in those efforts?
I don't think that's something that I can speak to. Speaking to, again, the U.S. Customs with the General Administration of China Customs relationship has been strong and cooperative. Outside of that, that's really outside my scope, sir.
Yeah, just on a general issue, let me just say this. The Peace Bridge is the busiest northern border crossing combined for commercial vehicles and passenger vehicles. We have been struggling with a new plaza, an American plaza on the American side, where the Canadians have successfully done their side. The X-ray and gamma ray detection technology, facial recognition, I'm speaking generally, that seems to be available now, which creates an opportunity for Buffalo, the Peace Bridge, to become the most modern, state-of-the-art land port of entry between the United States and Canada. I would just ask you, as a field leader in Customs and Border Protection, to please consider making whatever technology is available, make it available at the Peace Bridge, at the very least as a demonstration project, because I think it would go a long way, not in terms of testing the efficacy of that detection technology, but also generally cutting down on problems between the United States and Canada.
Yes, sir, and we worked very well with the Peace Bridge Authority on innovative approaches. The pre-arrival readiness evaluation system that Ron Reines has worked on it with us has really reduced the wait times on the Peace Bridge itself. The facial recognition is not ready for land processing yet. We're very close. We're doing very well in the air environment. Don't quite have a solution yet to have the facial technology working in a land border environment. But I think we have a very good relationship with the Peace Bridge.
And just finally, Mr. Chairman, I just want to say your Customs and Border Protection agents are real professionals, and they do a great job at all of the Western Europe border crossings. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your leadership on this subject. I appreciate your inclusion of some of us who are very interested in this. Gentlemen, thank you for your time. We, as members, represent 700,000 or so individuals, citizens who all have concerns about this. Parents, teachers, law enforcement, first responders, educators. This is a real problem. It's a real urgent problem. And I presume that after our discussion so far today, that we're on the same page when it comes to this issue of addressing the vulnerabilities in the international mail system. Am I correct? Do we have a consensus that we need to address this issue?
Yes, sir.
Yep. I know that seems like a kind of a slam dunk question, but in reality, we've got to be on the same page here and work together to figure this out. 318 million international packages entered the U.S. with no advanced electronic data or shipper or recipient name, address, or contents. That is a huge number, and we simply can't continue to allow this to happen. It's very obvious to me that China, Southeast Asia, those that are responsible for sending this into our country don't care and have done everything in their power to make sure that these synthetic opioids like fentanyl and carfentanil continue to get into our country. Mr. Higgins made a point that that fentanyl is 50 times as potent as heroin. Just to add on to that, carfentanil is 100 times as potent as fentanyl, and 5,000 times as potent as a unit of heroin, 5,000 times. In fact, it takes 2 milligrams of carfentanil to be lethal. And this package of sweetener has 1,000 milligrams in it. So it's just amazing how small it can be, and how that illustration is how much can be sent into this country and how lethal it can be. We've got a big job in our hands to get a hold of this, and that's why I'm working with my associates here and my colleagues in the Congress to introduce a bill that would close the loophole and make it harder for these drugs to enter illegally. And I'm glad to pick up where Representative Teaberry left off on the STOP Act, and also work with my colleague, Representative Faso, on this subject. It's designed to stop dangerous synthetic drugs like fentanyl and carfentanil from being shipped through our borders. Specifically, the bill would require shipments from foreign countries through our postal system to provide electronic advanced data, such as who and where it's coming from, who it's going to, where it's going, and what's in it, before the United States will accept it. This will enable our respective agencies to better target potential illegal packages and keep these dangerous drugs from ending up in the hands of drug traffickers who want to harm our local communities and our children. I'm wondering if you can provide me some information on this. There is a provision here that is outside of our control, and that is that effectively screening international mail is difficult, especially when their ability to obtain advanced electronic manifest information is dependent on whether or not there is a postal agreement with a foreign postal service. How do you reconcile that? How do we put a solution in place and be able to work with China and other countries to ensure that this solution works?
I think as it relates to the AED, right? I'll go back. Our focus has been, again, on this top 20, I'll keep saying it, represents 90% of the volume. China is certainly in that. We've been working on signing these bilateral agreements. We've got 5 of them. AED is absolutely mandated that you have to have it. We've mandated it now with the Express. We've got the untracked packages out of China specifically, which represent a significant volume of that, the packets that we're talking about that are coming in without that AED. And so the focus really is to, and they've been, I'll say, collaborating to get us to that point. We will have a substantial amount of AED of most of the China mail by the time we get to the end of this year. That's our focus with them. And so I think what we've got to do is kind of stay the course around doing that, stay very focused on where we see the volumes in the countries that we're focused with, and it will net us what we're looking for over time here.
Okay, big subject. Thank you all for your focus on this issue. Appreciate it. Yield back.
Thank the gentleman. I'm going to allow the ranking member to say a couple of closing comments. He's had some amazing thoughts.
Mr. Chairman, I want to thank our two witnesses today, first of all. They were excellent. I really mean that. I have a major problem in addressing the subject of any illicit drug because we haven't done a very good job. You've done your job. We're trying to figure out how we can do our job. We really have. And in saying that, we are never going to get to a point where we are able to have a seamless system at the borders, at the ports, and stopping illicit drugs coming into this country. So I start this way. No market, no sale. We've got the problem, the population. If we don't educate people about what these drugs do to us, it's not, as I said, it's not better living through chemistry. If we don't educate the public, or if we do educate the public and decide to get really into this, then I think we're going to have a better shot of curtailing the sale of drugs. This is the market. We are the market. Ordinary people living in rural America, suburban America, urban America. And the more there is a desire, I don't care what you do. I don't care how much electronic equipment you have at the port, at the border, it's not going to work. But I salute you for what you're doing day in and day out. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I want to thank you both for your testimony, first of all, but secondly, I want to thank you for your service. And having been a law enforcement officer for, that was my first career before I came here, 33 years, I understand that the law enforcement agencies and the postal office included in this are usually behind the curve when it comes to new resources, technology, and the ability to have the resources to address the issues. I mean, you just have an amazing hurdle to overcome in the thousands, hundreds of thousands of packages that you've got, millions of packages that you've got to look through to try to protect the citizens of this country. I can only compare it to, in a very small way, to my experience in working a serial murder case that you might be familiar with from the Seattle area called the Green River serial case, and that was in the 80s. We had 40,000 tip sheets and no computer. We did it by 3x5 note cards. We collected evidence, but there was no science other than blood typing in the 80s. And then all of a sudden, well, all of a sudden for us anyway, in the late 90s, DNA came into being, and we solved that case by technology, by new science. And sometimes, you know, the crooks get a little bit of a head start on us as far as technology, and they find a way around the system. I do think that, you know, the things that you've described today as steps that you've taken and you're in the middle of taking, I think those are great steps, but I do think that we need to support you in the advancement of technology, your ability to identify those packages, gain quality information, and have that technology help you further protect. But I think Mr. Pasquale does make a great point in that we do have a sociological problem here as far as the number of people who are willing to experiment with drugs, then therefore become addicted, especially to these opioids that we've discussed, and how dangerous they can be to destroy not only one life, but a community, and eventually the entire nation. And your abilities, your efforts, again, are just greatly appreciated. And I'd just like to say on behalf of this committee and the members of Congress, I think we'd all agree to thank you again for your service and recognizing the tough job that you have to do. So I'd like to thank the witnesses for their testimony and your responses to our questions. We appreciate that, and I think you've given us all much to think about as we prepare to move forward with legislation that would require the transmission of advanced electronic data on international mail shipments and prevent synthetic opioids from entering our country and harming American citizens. Please be advised that members will have 2 weeks to submit written questions to be answered later in writing. Those questions and your answers will be made a part of the formal hearing record. Our record will remain open until May 9th. I urge interested parties to submit statements to inform the committee's consideration of the issues discussed today. With that, the subcommittee stands adjourned. Thank you.